Listen before sleep. The truth about your mind may change you. Do you realize what your mind is quietly doing right now while you listen to these words? Right now, in this very moment, your mind is doing something extraordinary. Something so constant, so automatic, so deeply woven into the fabric of your experience that you almost certainly have never stopped to look at it directly. It is generating a voice, a continuous interior monologue that has been running without interruption from the first moment of your conscious life to this exact second. A narrator, a commentator, an endless stream of thoughts, judgments, memories, anticipations, worries, plans, and observations that fills every available moment of awareness like water fills a vessel. You are listening to this narration right now, and somewhere underneath it, or alongside it, or woven through it, your own mind's narration is also running, commenting on what you are hearing, agreeing or disagreeing, noticing the sound of the voice, thinking about whether you are comfortable, wondering what will be said next, planning something, remembering something, doing what it always does, which is to say, everything, constantly, without pause. And here is the thing that most people never think about. You did not start that voice. You did not choose to begin that narration. You did not sit down one morning and decide to generate a continuous stream of thought. It simply began, and it has never stopped. And you have, for the most part, simply identified with it so completely that the idea of being separate from it probably feels very strange right now. Welcome to the channel, Thoughts of Alan Watts. Tonight, we are going to explore something that sounds very simple, but is, in practice, one of the most profound things a human being can ever encounter. We are going to look at the mind. Not the brain, not the neuroscience, not the psychology of disorders or treatments or interventions. We are going to look at the mind the way you might look at a very old, very familiar room in your house, a room you have lived in for decades, and realize that you have never actually looked at it. You have always been busy with the things in it, but the room itself, the space, the quality of the light, the particular silence it holds at 3 a.m, you have never simply been in it. Tonight, you are going to be in it. And by the time we are done, the room may look very different than you expected. There is no hurry tonight. You have nowhere to be. The day is finished, whatever it contained. And whatever the next day will require of you, it is not here yet. There is only now, this moment, this particular configuration of attention and awareness, and the soft sound of these words in the quiet around you. Let your body settle. Let whatever tension you have been carrying announce itself, and then release. You don't need to force anything. Just let the natural weight of the body find its way down into whatever is holding it. Let the breath be what it always is when you stop trying to control it, which is to say, easy and automatic and sufficient. The mind, you will find, is a very interesting thing to be with when you are not trying to use it. Let us begin at the beginning. You are alive. This is, when you actually think about it, a remarkable fact. Not remarkable in the sense of being congratulatory or self-congratulatory. Not remarkable in the sense of requiring you to feel grateful or special. Simply remarkable in the literal sense, worth remarking on, worth pausing at for a moment before we slide past it into all the taken-for-granted business of being a person. You are alive, which means there is something it is like to be you. Right now, there is an experience happening. Colors are being perceived, or the darkness behind closed eyes. Sounds are being processed. The sensation of the body against the surface beneath it, the slight temperature of the air on the skin, the rhythm of the breath. These are not just physical processes. There is something it is like to experience them. There is, as philosophers say, a quality to the experience, a what it is likeness, that is the very essence of consciousness itself. And that consciousness, that awareness, that simple, open quality of experience has been present in you since the beginning, since before you had language for it, since before you had a name, since before you had any concept of being separate from the world around you. The awareness was there first. Everything else, the name, the history, the personality, the habits, the fears, the hopes, all of it came later, layered on top of something that was already present and complete. But here is the strange part. At some point in the development of every human being, something happens. The awareness that was simply there, open and undivided, begins to generate a very specific kind of thought. A thought about itself. A thought that says, essentially, I am here. I am the one who is aware. I am a self. I am a particular thing, distinct from other things, with my own interior life, and my own perspective, and my own continuity through time. This is the birth of the ego. Not the ego in the negative sense, not the inflated self-importance that the word sometimes connotes. Simply the ego in the original Latin sense, which is just the word for I. The sense of being a self, a particular, bounded, continuous, separate self. And this is where things get very interesting. Because this sense of self, this ego, this I, is one of the most powerful, most convincing, and most thoroughly examined things in the history of human thought. Philosophers have been thinking about it for thousands of years. Mystics and meditators have been investigating it for just as long. And they have arrived at something very strange. Something that most people never hear about. Or if they hear about it, they nod politely and immediately forget it because it doesn't fit the way things feel. The self that you think you are, the continuous, solid, bounded self that seems to be the center of your experience, the one who is hearing these words and having thoughts about them and existing through time with a history and a future, that self is not what it appears to be. This is not a criticism, and it is not a cause for alarm. It is simply what happens when you look carefully, when you actually investigate the nature of the thing you call yourself. Let us do that investigation together, very slowly, very gently, the way you might approach a wild animal that you don't want to startle. Because the mind, when you try to examine it too forcefully, tends to bolt, tends to produce more thoughts about thinking, tends to generate commentary about commentary. The investigation needs to be quiet and patient and slightly oblique, approaching from the side rather than head-on. So, let us ask a very simple question. Who is listening to these words right now? Not what, not the brain, not the nervous system, not the auditory cortex processing the sound. Who? The who. The one who is having the experience of hearing. Where is that one? Where do you locate the hearer of these sounds? You will probably locate it somewhere in the head, behind the eyes, perhaps, or in a general area of the skull, a kind of center of experience, a home base for the I. That is where most people locate it when they first try to look. But here is what happens when you actually look for it, when you actually turn the attention toward that location and look for the looker. When you try to find the experiencer of experience, you find more experience. You find sensations, thoughts, perceptions, feelings, but you do not find a thing that is separate from all of these. You do not find a solid, bounded object that you can point at and say, there, that is the self. That is the one who is doing all of this. Every time you look for the looker, what you find is more looking. Every time you try to observe the observer, what you find is more observation. This is what Alan Watts spent much of his life trying to point people toward. Not in a frightening or disorienting way, in a liberating way. Because the thing that seems to be doing the searching, the thing that seems to be the self that is looking for itself, is identical with the awareness in which all of this is happening. The self is not a thing that awareness belongs to. The self is something that awareness is doing, a pattern, a process, a happening rather than a having. And this, it turns out, makes all the difference in the world. Think about how you relate to your thoughts. When a thought arises, perhaps a worry about something, a concern about tomorrow, a memory of something painful from yesterday, what happens? You identify with it. You say, I am having this thought. Or more precisely, you don't even say that. You just are the thought. The thought appears, and immediately it is you. You are it. The thinker and the thought are the same thing. And the thought feels completely real and completely solid and completely your responsibility to either follow to its conclusion or fight against. But what if the thought were not yours in the way that feels true? What if a thought were more like a cloud, appearing in the sky of awareness, real in the sense of being there, real in the sense of being visible, of having a shape, of casting a shadow perhaps, depending on its size and density, but not the sky, not the awareness in which it appears, not the fundamental nature of what you are, just a cloud, arising and passing according to conditions, not summoned by any act of will, not controllable by any act of will either, just appearing, as clouds do when the conditions for a cloud are present, and passing as clouds do when the conditions change. You have probably had the experience of watching clouds from below on a lazy afternoon, the way they drift across the sky without hurry, the way they change shape continuously, the edges softening and reforming, the whole cloud transforming almost imperceptibly from moment to moment. The way no single cloud persists, they all arise and dissolve, and the sky remains. Behind all of it, unchanging, vast, clear. Your awareness is like that sky. Not the contents of awareness, not the thoughts and feelings and sensations that arise in it, but the awareness itself, the simple, open, present quality of being conscious. That has never changed. That was there before the first word. That will be there after the last thought of the day. That is present right now, in this moment, holding all of this. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that Watts returned to again and again in so many different ways, across so many decades of exploring these questions, is that this awareness is not personal. It is not something that you privately own. It is not a possession of the ego. The awareness in which your experience arises is the same awareness in which all experience arises. Not numerically the same, not the same instance of a thing, but qualitatively identical. The capacity for consciousness, the simple, open quality of experience, is not something that was manufactured individually for each person. It is the fundamental nature of experience itself. It is what experience is, wherever and whenever experience happens. This is a very old idea. It appears in different forms in many different traditions. The Upanishads call the individual self, the Atman, and the universal consciousness, Brahman, and they say, Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. What you fundamentally are is what everything fundamentally is, not in the sense of physical material, but in the sense of the aware presence that underlies all apparent things. The Zen tradition says it differently. It says that the ordinary mind is the Buddha mind, that enlightenment is not a special state to be attained, but simply the clear seeing of what is already the case. The awakened state is not different from this state. This state, seen clearly, without the overlays of concepts and stories, and the convinced sense of being a separate self, is already what is being sought. And Christian mysticism says it in yet another way, in the voice of Meister Eckhart, the 13th century Dominican friar, who wrote things that his church found deeply alarming. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. The observer and the observed are not two separate things meeting across a distance. They are the same thing, from two different angles. Now, I understand that this may sound very abstract, and it may sound, to a part of the mind that is very comfortable with the ordinary story of who you are, slightly threatening, as if something is trying to take away the self, as if the implication is that you don't exist, that the experience of being you is an illusion, that nothing is real. But that is not what is being said, not at all. What is being said is something much more interesting and much less threatening. What is being said is that you exist, but in a different way than you think you exist. You are not a bounded, solid, unchanging, separate self who is merely visiting this universe for a lifetime and who must therefore spend the entire visit trying to stay safe and maintain the integrity of this bounded, separate self against all the forces that would diminish or destroy it. That is the story the ego tells, and it is, as we shall see, a story that creates a very specific kind of suffering, a chronic, low-level, almost universal human suffering that is so constant most people don't even notice it as suffering. They just think it is the default setting of being alive. What you actually are is something more like a process, a pattern, an event, something the universe is doing rather than something that is merely in the universe. You are not a thing that happens to have consciousness. You are consciousness, happening in a particular form, for a particular time, in a particular place. The way a wave is not a thing that happens to be in the ocean. A wave is something the ocean is doing. And when a wave passes, the ocean does not lose anything. It was always the ocean. The waving was temporary. The ocean is permanent, or as permanent as anything in this impermanent universe ever is. Let us rest with that image for a moment. The ocean and the wave. You are the wave, not in the diminishing sense, not in the sense of being lesser or more temporary than the ocean, and therefore less worthy of attention or care, but in the sense that the wave is the ocean expressing itself in a particular form. The wave has everything the ocean has. It is made of the same water. It follows the same physics. It carries the same history, in a sense. Every water molecule in a wave has been in that ocean for as long as the ocean has existed. The wave is complete. The wave is fully real. The wave is exactly what it is supposed to be. And the wave does not need to be anxious about ceasing to be a wave, because what it is made of, the water, the ocean, does not cease. It simply takes a different form. Another wave will come. Another wave is always coming. The waving never stops. This is not consolation for death. This is a different way of understanding life. But let us not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let us come back to the immediate. Let us come back to this moment, to the breath moving in and out, to the body resting in the dark, to the mind doing its remarkable, automatic, unstoppable thing. Because there is something very specific that happens when people encounter these ideas. When they hear that the self might not be what it seems, when they hear that thoughts are not things they need to follow or fight, but are more like weather passing through a sky of awareness. The immediate response, very often, is something like, "Yes, that sounds lovely, but then why can't I stop thinking? Why does the mind not quiet down? If these thoughts are just weather, why does the weather feel so relentless? Why does it feel like I am drowning in it rather than standing in it?" And this is exactly the right question. Because the reason the thoughts feel relentless is not because there is something wrong with you. It is because of a very specific habit of mind that is almost universal among human beings in the modern world. And that is so deeply ingrained that it functions like a law of nature rather than a habit that can be changed. The habit is this: the identification of the self with the stream of thought. Most people, most of the time, are not aware that they are having thoughts. They are their thoughts. The thought arises, and there is no gap between the thought and the thinker, no moment of perspective in which the thought is seen as a thought rather than as reality. The thought about the future is not experienced as a mental event occurring in the present. It is experienced as the future. The thought about the past is not experienced as a memory happening now. It is experienced as the past, as real and as immediate as anything in the environment. And because of this, the mind is always in two times at once. The body is always in the present, breathing the present air, feeling the present sensations, existing in the present moment. But the mind is almost never fully present. It is in the remembered past or the anticipated future, and the gap between where the body is and where the mind is, this perpetual displacement of attention from the actual present moment into the constructed narratives of past and future, is the source of a very large proportion of human suffering. Watts talked about this in terms of the insistence on permanence, the way the ego, by its very nature, is always trying to hold on, always trying to secure itself, always trying to ensure its own continuity and stability in a universe that is irreversibly and totally impermanent. The universe, you see, does not do permanence. There is nothing in the universe that is fixed. Everything is process. Everything is movement. Everything is change. The galaxies are moving. The stars are burning through their fuel. The planets are slowly drifting in their orbits. The mountains are being worn down by wind and rain. The cells of your body are being replaced continuously. The thoughts in your mind are arising and passing. There is not a single atom in the universe that is doing anything other than moving and changing and interacting with other moving and changing things. This is not a flaw in the design of the universe. This is not something the universe got wrong. This is simply what the universe is. A process, a flowing, a dance of unimaginable complexity and beauty, in which nothing is ever quite the same from one moment to the next. And into this universe of pure process, the ego arrives with its demand for permanence, its insistence that things stay the same, its desperate, heroic, ultimately futile effort to hold on to what is good and push away what is bad, and generally manage the unmanageable flow of experience into something fixed and certain and safe. This is not a character flaw. It is not selfishness. It is not stupidity. It is the absolutely natural and logical consequence of being a creature with a sufficiently complex nervous system to model the future. If you can imagine the future, you can be afraid of the future. If you can remember the past, you can be attached to things that are gone. The capacity for time travel in the mind, the ability to mentally inhabit the past and the future, is one of the most extraordinary capacities evolution has produced. And it comes with a very specific set of side effects. The side effects are anxiety about what might come and regret about what is gone, attachment to what is pleasant and aversion to what is unpleasant, the constant sense that things are either not yet right or no longer right, that the present moment, whatever it contains, is either a stepping stone to some future moment that will finally be right, or a falling away from some past moment that was right. The present moment in this mode of experiencing is almost never itself sufficient. It is always pointing beyond itself. It is always a means to an end, rather than an end in itself. And the irony, the extraordinary, almost comic irony, is that the future moment that will finally be sufficient never arrives as the future. It always arrives as the present. And when it arrives as the present, it too points beyond itself. The mind that is always living in the next moment will always be arriving in a present that immediately becomes a past, and a next moment that immediately becomes a present. And the sufficiency the okayness, the enoughness of the present, is perpetually deferred. This is what Watts called the backwards law, the idea that the harder you try to achieve a state of peace or happiness or stillness, the more agitated and restless and unsatisfied you become. Because the very trying, the very seeking, presupposes a lack, and the mind that is seeking is always finding the seeking rather than what is sought. But here is the strange part. This is not a counsel of despair. This is not a philosophy of resignation or passivity. This is the beginning of something that looks very different from the pursuit of peace, but turns out to be the thing itself. Let us talk about water. Water is one of Watts's favorite metaphors, because water does something that the human mind almost never does, at least not in its conditioned state. Water is completely responsive to its environment. It doesn't fight its container. It doesn't insist on going uphill. It doesn't resist the shapes that the landscape offers it. It simply finds its own level, always and inevitably, by following the path of least resistance. This is not weakness. This is not passivity. The water in a river moves with tremendous force. It carves canyons. It moves mountains given enough time. But it does this not by fighting the landscape, but by responding perfectly to the landscape, by being exactly what it is, water, in exactly the circumstances it finds itself in, and flowing accordingly. The Tao Te Ching, that ancient Chinese text that Watts loved and translated and meditated on for much of his life, says this about water. The highest good is like water. Water benefits 10,000 things and does not compete. It dwells in places that men reject, and so is like the Tao. The Tao, the way, the underlying nature of things, the flow of reality that is always happening, that nothing can oppose, that everything is embedded in, whether it knows it or not. The Tao is not a thing, not a force, not a being. It is the way things are, the natural order, the going-onness of reality. And the human ego, the ego with its insistence on control and permanence, is always fighting the Tao, always swimming upstream, always insisting that reality should be different from what it is, always in a state of subtle or not so subtle conflict with the basic fact that things are as they are, rather than as they are supposed to be. Now, you might ask, and it is a very reasonable thing to ask, but isn't it good to try to improve things? Isn't it good to resist injustice? Isn't it good to plan for the future and try to make things better? Isn't acceptance of the Tao just a fancy name for giving up? And the answer is a very specific no, not giving up, the opposite of giving up. Because the person who is truly in harmony with the flow of reality, truly not fighting the basic nature of things, is not passive, is not resigned, is not defeated. That person is available, fully present, fully responsive, capable of acting with tremendous effectiveness, precisely because they are not squandering energy fighting the current. The martial arts master is not passive. The skilled sailor is not passive. But the master and the sailor both know how to work with forces rather than against them, how to find the current and use it, rather than exhausting themselves trying to overpower it. This is Wu Wei, the Taoist concept that is usually translated as non-doing or non-action, but which is better understood as not forcing. Acting in accordance with the nature of things. Doing what the situation calls for, not what the ego demands. Responding rather than insisting. And the interesting thing, the deeply interesting thing, is that this kind of action, this responsive, non-forcing, situation-attuned action, is more effective than the forced, ego-driven kind. Not because of any mystical principle, but because it is in contact with reality. It is working with what is actually there, rather than with what the ego wishes were there. Think about a moment in your own life when you have been in what athletes call the zone, the flow state. When you were doing something, perhaps playing a sport, or making music, or having a conversation, or working on a problem, and the thinking stopped. The commentary fell away. There was just the doing. Action without the narrator running alongside it. Performance without the performance critic standing over it. Being fully in the activity, rather than monitoring the activity from a slight distance. That is Wu Wei. That is the natural state that exists when the ego's constant supervising and managing and worrying and planning relaxes just enough to let the activity happen through you rather than being done by you. And it feels, when it happens, like everything suddenly becoming easier, like a weight lifting. Like the world cooperating rather than resisting. Like something clicking into place. It is not a special state. It is the natural state. The state the mind falls into when it stops trying to be other than what it is. Let us talk about the nature of problems. Watts had a wonderful way of looking at problems. He would often say that most of what we experience as problems are not problems in the way we think of problems. They are not mistakes that need to be corrected, not deviations from a norm that need to be brought back to that norm. They are simply aspects of a situation that we have decided we do not want to be aspects of the situation. The rain is not a problem. It is simply rain. It becomes a problem when I decide it should not be raining. My bad mood is not a problem. It is simply a mood. It becomes a problem when I decide I should not be in a bad mood. The aging of the body is not a problem. It is simply the nature of biological organisms. It becomes a problem when I decide that bodies should not age. This is not to say that rain cannot be inconvenient, or that bad moods are not unpleasant, or that aging does not involve difficulty. Of course, these things can be true. But the layer of suffering that comes from the judgment that these things should not be happening, that sits on top of the raw experience like an additional weight, that is optional. That is not required by the nature of the situation. It is added by the mind. And the mind adds it because of a very specific belief that operates at a level so deep it is almost never examined. The belief that the way things are is not okay. That reality as it is requires correction. That the present moment is insufficient and must be supplemented by a future moment in which things will finally be as they should be. This belief, this deep pre-reflective conviction that the present is not enough, is the foundation of what Watts would call the cosmic drama. The drama in which each of us is the hero or the victim. the protagonist of a story in which the plot is always threatening to go wrong, in which the stakes are always one's own survival and happiness, and the survival and happiness of the people one loves, in which the ending is always uncertain and always potentially catastrophic. It is exhausting, this drama, and it is completely voluntary. Not in the sense that you could simply decide not to be in it, not in the sense that it is a choice in the ordinary meaning of that word, but voluntary in the deeper sense, that it is not required by the universe. The universe did not install this drama. The universe is doing its thing, which is to say, everything, all at once, without story and without drama. The story, the drama, the sense of threat and the need for resolution, these are added by the mind. They are the mind's contribution to an experience that, without that contribution, would simply be what it is. And what it would simply be, if you could meet it without the drama, is quite extraordinary, quite beautiful, in a way that has nothing to do with pleasantness or unpleasantness. The simple fact of being here, of awareness happening, of the extraordinary, improbable event of consciousness. This. Let us go somewhere slightly different for a moment. Let us think about the night sky. On a clear night, away from the light pollution of cities, the Milky Way is visible, not just as a vague, bright band, but as something that has genuine depth and structure. Clouds of stars, regions of density and sparseness, the dark lanes of dust that cross it, the particular quality of light that comes from several 100 billion stars at such distances that each individual star is invisible, and what you see is their combined light, a light that has been traveling for thousands of years to reach your eyes. The Milky Way is the galaxy we live inside. We are embedded in one of its spiral arms, about 26,000 light years from the center. We cannot see the galaxy from outside, the way you can see the Andromeda galaxy on a dark night, a small, fuzzy patch of light in the constellation Andromeda, also several 100 billion stars, also several million light years away. These numbers are not really graspable, not in the way that the number of people in a room is graspable, or the distance to the nearest city. They are numbers in the sense that you can write them down and do arithmetic with them, but experientially, phenomenologically, as vivid images that the mind can actually hold and inhabit, they are beyond a capacity of the imagination. And Watts found this significant. He found it interesting that the universe is almost entirely outside the scale of what human consciousness can comprehend. Not just large, but incomprehensibly large. Not just old, but incomprehensibly old. Not just complex, but incomprehensibly complex. The human mind, the same mind that worries about what happened in a conversation yesterday and what might happen in a meeting next week, is embedded in a universe of this scale. And it mostly doesn't notice. It mostly doesn't notice because it is busy. Busy with the drama. Busy with the narrative of the self and its concerns. Busy with the immediate, the local, the personal. The universe of 13 billion years and hundreds of billions of galaxies is background noise. The foreground is always the self and its story. But occasionally, very occasionally, something interrupts the story. Something creates a gap in the narrative. You are standing somewhere on a clear night, and you look up, really look up, and for a moment the scale of it lands, not as a concept, but as an actual experience. The vast, patient, indifferent, extraordinary fact of all of it. Just being there, just continuing, without concern for whether you are comfortable or successful or liked or at peace. Just the universe, doing what it does. And in that moment, for that moment, the drama pauses. The ego, with its concerns and its projects, with its constant subtle threat assessment and its perpetual planning, goes quiet. Not because it has been defeated or overcome, but because something has been seen that is larger than the ego's usual field of vision, and the ego doesn't quite know what to do with it. Very few people ever notice this. Very few people take that moment and simply remain in it, rather than immediately converting it back into narrative. Rather than immediately thinking something like, "How beautiful," or "I feel so small," or "What does this mean for how I should live my life?" The moment of naked encounter with the scale of things, without commentary, without the automatic conversion of experience into story, that is rare. And it is, in its way, a taste of what Watts was pointing toward throughout his life. Not the cosmic scale specifically, but the quality of experience that is available when the narrative pauses. The quality of direct, unnarrativized encounter with what is. The quality of presence that is always here, but almost always covered over by the thinking mind's incessant production of story. Let me tell you a story that Watts often told, in various forms. There is a student who goes to a Zen master and asks, "I have been meditating for 10 years. I sit every day. I try very hard, but my mind is still full of thoughts. What am I doing wrong?" The master looks at the student for a moment. Then he picks up a bowl and begins to pour tea into it. He pours and pours, past the point where the bowl is full, so that the tea overflows and runs down the sides and onto the table and onto the floor. The student watches this with mounting concern and finally says, "Master, the bowl is full. The tea is overflowing. It can't hold any more." And the master puts down the teapot and says, "You are like this bowl. How can I show you anything when you are already so full?" The point of the story is not that knowledge is bad. The point is about the quality of attention you bring to any experience. The bowl that is already full cannot receive anything. The mind that is perpetually generating its own commentary, its own interpretations, its own reactions to everything it encounters, cannot truly encounter anything. It encounters its reaction to the thing, rather than the thing itself. The meditator who is trying hard to meditate is using the very faculty that meditation is an attempt to see clearly. Using thought to observe thought is like trying to see the eye with the eye. The organ of observation cannot observe itself in the usual way. It has to approach itself from the side, obliquely, gently, with a quality of attention that is more like listening than looking. This oblique, receptive quality of attention is what Watts called choiceless awareness, a phrase he borrowed from the philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti, who explored similar territory from a different angle. Choiceless awareness is awareness that does not select, that does not choose to attend to this and not to that, that does not prefer the pleasant sensation over the unpleasant, or the interesting thought over the dull one, that simply receives what arises, as it arises, without any additional commentary, This sounds simple, and in one sense it is the simplest thing imaginable. You are already aware. Awareness is already happening. The light is already on, as it were. There is nothing to do, nothing to achieve, nothing to attain. But in practice, for most people, it is almost impossibly difficult. Because the mind is so habituated to choosing, so thoroughly trained to select and prefer and reject and evaluate, that simply receiving what arises without evaluation feels like not doing anything. And the mind that is used to doing has a very strong resistance to not doing. It mistakes activity for aliveness, thinking for being, the constant production of narrative for reality itself. And so meditation, in the sense that Watts understood it, is not a practice of doing something to the mind. It is a practice of noticing what the mind is already doing, of seeing the machinery, of watching the process of thought generation without identifying with the thoughts, of remaining as much as possible in the position of the witness rather than the protagonist of the mental drama. And here is the really interesting part. Here is what makes this not just a philosophical exercise, but a genuinely transformative encounter with reality. When the identification with thought loosens, even slightly, even momentarily, something very specific happens. The quality of experience changes. Not the content. The content might be exactly the same. The same thoughts might arise, the same sensations, the same sounds in the environment. But something about the way they are experienced is different. There is a spaciousness, a sense that these things are arising in a wider context, that there is a background against which all of this is occurring, a ground of experience that is not itself part of what is being experienced. This background, this ground, this spacious quality of awareness itself, this is what the Zen tradition calls Buddha nature, what the Hindu tradition calls Brahman, what the Christian mystics call God, when they mean it in the non-theistic mystical sense, rather than the personal deity sense. It is not something exotic or remote. It is the most immediate thing there is. It is the awareness in which all of this is arising, right now. You don't need to achieve it. You cannot achieve it, because it is what you already are, at the level that is prior to the ego and its projects, prior to the stream of thought and its narrative, prior to the whole drama of being a particular person with a particular story. This is what Watts was sometimes trying to convey when he talked about the game of hide and seek that he believed the universe was playing with itself. The universe, he suggested, is consciousness exploring itself through the apparent division of itself into individual conscious beings, each of whom forgets, by design, that they are the whole. Each individual is the universe, temporarily experiencing itself as something separate and finite, exploring what it is like to be this, to have this particular perspective, to navigate this particular set of circumstances. And the forgetting is not a mistake. It is part of the game. If you knew you were the whole, you could not genuinely experience being a part. The drama requires the forgetting. The forgetting enables the drama. And the drama is how the whole explores the range of what is possible for it. And then, occasionally, through whatever combination of circumstances and inquiry and openness and simple readiness, there is a moment of recognition, a moment in which the individual suddenly sees through the forgetting, in which the mask slips, in which the consciousness that has been pretending to be a separate individual suddenly catches a glimpse of what it is actually up to. And the insight, when it comes, tends to have a quality of hilarity to it, of, yes, of course, how did I not see this? Of recognition rather than discovery, of coming home rather than arriving somewhere new. Let us talk about this differently. Let us talk about it through the experience of the body. You are lying down right now, or sitting, in some posture of rest, and the body is doing an extraordinary number of things that you are not aware of, and would not know how to do if you tried to do them consciously. The heart is beating, not because you told it to, not because you are consciously maintaining the rhythm. It is just beating. Something is doing the beating, something that knows how, something that has been doing it without interruption since before you were born, since the first weeks of your existence in the womb, when there was not yet a you to know about it. The lungs are breathing, again, not because you are controlling it. You can control your breath temporarily. You are doing it right now, probably, since I mentioned breathing. But the moment you stop paying attention to it, it continues on its own. Something knows how to breathe. Something that is not the ego, not the thinking mind, not the narrator. The immune system is working. The digestive system is processing. The liver is filtering. The kidneys are regulating. The endocrine system is producing its precise chemical signals. The nervous system is doing its extraordinary work of integrating input from millions of sensory receptors and producing moment-by-moment maps of the environment and the body's place in it. All of this is happening right now, without your participation, without your knowledge, without your management. Who is doing all of this? Not the ego, not the thinking mind, not the narrator. The narrator is a late arrival on the scene, a relatively recent evolutionary development, a thin layer of linguistic self-reference on top of a biological process of unimaginable sophistication. The narrator did not invent the heart. The narrator did not design the immune system. The narrator is, in the largest frame, a passenger, but a passenger who has somehow convinced itself that it is the driver. This is the central comedy, if you want to call it that, or the central tragedy, depending on your perspective, of human psychology. The part that is capable of language and narrative and self-reflection. The part that can say I, the ego, has come to believe that it is in charge of, responsible for, and the source of the entire enterprise of being alive. While the actual engine, the actual intelligence, the actually responsible party is doing its work below the surface of consciousness, silently, perfectly, without any need for the ego's involvement. And the ego's insistence on being in charge, its conviction that it needs to monitor and manage and control, its constant anxiety about whether things are being done correctly, creates friction with an underlying intelligence that was doing just fine before the ego arrived on the scene. Think about what happens when you try to sleep. Sleep is one of the clearest examples of this dynamic. Sleep is not something you can do. You cannot will yourself to sleep. The harder you try, the less likely it is to happen. Sleep is something that happens to you, or more precisely, something that the body-mind system produces under the right conditions, when the ego backs off enough to allow it. The conditions for sleep include something like a willingness to release control, a willingness to allow the organism to take over, a loosening of the grip that the thinking mind maintains on experience during the day. And the curious thing is that the conditions for sleep are very similar to the conditions for the kind of presence or awareness that contemplative traditions have been cultivating for millennia. Not identical. Sleep is not enlightenment, to put it mildly. But they share a structural feature, which is the relaxation of the ego's control agenda. The willingness to not know what comes next. The willingness to release the management of experience. And this is why the approach to sleep, the hypnagogic state, the threshold between waking and sleeping, is often described as a place where unusual perceptions occur, where the mind begins to produce images that the waking mind did not generate intentionally, where the boundary between the self and the world becomes more permeable, where the narrative of the ego begins to dissolve into something more fluid and less literal. This is the territory we are in right now, this threshold, this place where the day and its concerns are becoming less insistent, where the thoughts are beginning to come more slowly and less urgently, where the grip of the ordinary waking mind is loosening. This is a good place to be. And in this place, let us continue to explore these ideas, slowly and without urgency, letting them drift through the mind, the way clouds drift through the sky. Not trying to hold on to them, not trying to analyze them or evaluate them, or decide what to do with them. Just letting them be present, and then letting them pass. Very few people ever notice what is present in this threshold state, because most people, when they reach it, either fall asleep immediately or try very hard to stay awake and think about things. The threshold itself, the quality of experience that is available there, is passed through rather than inhabited. But right now, we are going to simply be here, in the threshold, in the place where the ordinary mind is softening and the deeper ground is becoming more accessible. And we are going to see what is there. There is a kind of thinking that is different from ordinary thinking. Most thinking is serial. One thought follows another in a more or less logical sequence. The mind moves from A to B to C, following chains of association, following the logic of narrative and causality. This is the thinking that does arithmetic and plans dinner and remembers where the keys are. But there is another kind of thinking that is more like dreaming, more like sensing, more like being moved by something than moving toward something. In this kind of thinking, images and ideas and feelings arise without any sense of having been summoned. They present themselves. They have a quality of unexpected arrival rather than deliberate production. This is the thinking of poetry, of music, of the kind of insight that arrives not when you are grinding away at a problem, but when you have stopped grinding and the mind has relaxed into something more open and receptive. And here is the interesting thing. This second kind of thinking is much closer to the actual nature of the mind than the first kind. The first kind, the serial, deliberate, narrative kind, is what the mind produces when it is in its most controlled and effortful mode. The second kind is what the mind produces when it relaxes back into its underlying nature, which means that the most creative, most insightful, most genuinely intelligent thinking often happens not when you are trying hard, but when you have stopped trying, when you have released the agenda, when the mind is allowed to do what it does rather than what you are forcing it to do. This is one of the reasons why some of the most creative people in the history of human culture have had such interesting relationships with rest and dreams and reverie. The insights that come in the moments before sleep, the problems that seem insoluble and then solve themselves overnight, the creative breakthroughs that arrive during walks or baths or in any state of relaxed, unfocused attention. These are not coincidences. They are the natural consequence of what happens when the effortful, controlling part of the mind gets out of the way. Watts often said that the universe is not a machine that requires constant maintenance by a conscious operator. The universe is an organism, a process, a happening, and it does not need you to manage it. It was doing just fine before you arrived, and will do just fine after you leave. What it needs from you, insofar as it needs anything, is your participation. Your genuine, full, present participation. Not your management, not your control, not your constant intervention and correction and adjustment. Your participation. The way a musician participates in the music, not forcing it to be what it is supposed to be, but responding to what it is in real time, with skill and sensitivity, and above all, with trust that the music knows where it is going. And here is something that Watts found deeply significant. The universe, at its largest scale, at the scale of galaxies and cosmic time, operates without a plan. There is no blueprint that the universe is working from, no predetermined outcome it is trying to achieve. The universe is making it up as it goes, or rather, it is not making anything, because making implies intentionality. It is simply proceeding, unfolding, expressing its own nature in every moment, without reference to any external standard or goal. And at the smallest scale, at the quantum level, the universe is also fundamentally indeterminate, fundamentally probabilistic rather than deterministic. The behavior of individual particles cannot be predicted. Only the statistical distributions of large numbers of particles. At the basement level, at the most fundamental level of physical reality that our science has so far reached, the universe is not following a script. It is improvising. And between the quantum level and the cosmic level, there is you, embedded in a universe that is improvising at every scale. A universe in which creativity and novelty and the genuinely unexpected are not departures from the normal course of things, but are built into the very nature of things. And the ego, this remarkable, useful, extraordinary, ultimately limited ego, is the part of the universe that has decided it knows how things should go, that has access to the script, the blueprint, the correct outcome, that is responsible for steering the improvisation toward the right conclusion. You can feel how absurd this is when you look at it from a sufficient distance. This extraordinarily complex, creative, improvising universe, 13.8 billion years old, hundreds of billions of galaxies, an uncountable number of stars and planets and life forms and possibilities. And in one small corner of it, on one small planet, in one ordinary galaxy, a particular arrangement of atoms briefly develops the capacity for self-reflection and immediately concludes that it is in charge of everything and responsible for making sure it all goes correctly. There is something almost lovable about this. The sheer audacity of it, the complete sincerity of it, the way the ego really believes, with total conviction, that it needs to do what it does, that without its constant supervision, things would fall apart, that the universe requires its management. And Watts would laugh at this, not unkindly. He had a wonderful laugh, a deep, warm, genuine laugh at the cosmic joke of it all. The laugh of someone who sees the game clearly enough to find it funny rather than frightening. The laugh of recognition, of, yes, this is what consciousness does when it forgets what it is. This is the dream the universe dreams when it pretends to be a separate self trying to manage an alien environment. Let us talk about fear for a moment. Fear is the primary tool of the ego, not in a malevolent sense, simply in the sense that the ego is a survival mechanism, and survival mechanisms run on threat detection. The ego is always scanning for threats, always assessing the environment for danger, always maintaining a vigilance that was extremely useful when the threats were predators and famines and tribal conflicts, and that is somewhat less useful when the threats are social embarrassment and professional failure and the judgments of other people. The fundamental fear that underlies all specific fears is the fear of annihilation, the fear of not existing, the fear of the self, this precious, solid, continuous, bounded self, ceasing to be. Death, obviously, but also the smaller deaths. The death of how I think of myself, the death of my reputation, the death of my relationships, the death of my certainties and beliefs and familiar ways of being. All of these are forms of the basic ego fear, the conviction that the self must be maintained and defended and preserved, that its dissolution would be catastrophic. And yet, and here we come to the very heart of what Watts was exploring. The dissolution of the ego is not the tragedy it appears to be. The dissolution of the illusion of the separate self reveals not emptiness, but fullness, not loss, but expansion, not death, but the recognition that what you are is not what you thought you were, and what you actually are is both larger and simpler and infinitely more sufficient than the ego could ever achieve. This is not just a philosophical claim. It is what is reported by people who have had experiences of ego dissolution through deep meditation, through certain kinds of psychedelic experience, through the extremity of illness or grief or near-death experience, through moments of overwhelming beauty, through falling in love, through the experience of deep musical flow, or athletic or artistic absorption. All of these, in their different ways, involve the temporary dissolution or diminishment of the ordinary ego. And almost universally, the experience is reported not as terrifying, but as liberating, not as loss, but as a homecoming. The word that people use most often for it is free. I felt free, as if something that I had been carrying for a very long time was suddenly, unexpectedly, completely gone. What was gone was the weight of the separate self, the weight of the constant management project, the weight of the ego's conviction that it needs to be defended and maintained and improved and projected in the correct way. Without that weight, which is so constant that most people never notice it as weight until it lifts, the experience of being alive becomes something quite different. It becomes, for that moment, sufficient, more than sufficient. The present moment, simply being here, simply being aware, becomes what it always actually is, the only moment that exists, the only place anything ever happens, the only location where life can be lived. But here is the strange part. Here is the part that requires some careful attention. This recognition, this glimpse of what is actually the case, cannot be held on to. The moment you try to grasp it, to keep it, to repeat it, to achieve it again, you have reintroduced the ego and its project. The seeking mind has returned, and the seeking mind, by its very seeking, creates the illusion of a gap between itself and what it seeks. This is why Watts always resisted the idea of meditation as a technique for achieving enlightenment, as if enlightenment were a state that could be produced by the right procedure, as if there were a set of steps that, correctly followed, would deliver you to the right experience. There are no steps. Or rather, the steps are not what they appear to be. The steps point, obliquely, at something that is already here. The practice is not a production process. It is more like a process of becoming less, of unlearning, of the gradual, careful, patient dissolution of the habits of mind that prevent the already present awareness from being recognized as already present. And this dissolution cannot be forced. It can be invited. It can be created conditions for. It can be approached with patience and consistency and a quality of gentle curiosity that does not have a specific goal in mind. But it cannot be grabbed. It cannot be engineered. It cannot be earned. It can only be allowed. And this allowing, this relaxing into what is already the case, this is what we are practicing right now. In this quiet, in this darkness, with the breath moving slowly and the body growing heavier and the mind beginning to soften at the edges, this is it. This is the practice. Not meditating, not trying to achieve a particular state, simply being here, simply allowing the mind to be what it is, simply allowing awareness to be what it already is. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to achieve anything. The awareness that is hearing these words is already what you are looking for. You are already what you are looking for. The seeker is the sought. Let me tell you another story, one that Watts loved to tell. There is a fish swimming in the ocean who hears from the older fish that there is something called water, and that water is essential to life, that everything depends on water, that the great teachers of fish have spoken of water as the source and ground of all being. So the fish sets out to find water. It swims and swims, searching everywhere. It asks other fish if they have found water. It consults the wisest fish it can find. It follows every path it can think of, and everywhere it goes, it finds only ocean. Only the same endless, undifferentiated, thoroughly familiar ocean that it has always swum in. After many years of searching, the fish returns to the wisest teacher it knows and says, "I have searched everywhere for water. I have not found it. Tell me where it is." And the old fish looks at the young fish for a moment and then says very quietly, "You have been in water since the moment you were born. You will be in water until the moment you die. You have never been out of water, not for a single instant. Water is not something you need to find. It is the very medium of your existence. Consciousness is the water. Awareness is the water, the ground of all experience. The simple, open quality of there being something it is like to be here is the water. And you have been in it since before your first memory, before your first word, before your first sense of being a self. You have never been outside it. It is the medium of your existence. And all of this time, all of this searching, all of this effort to find peace or happiness or presence or enlightenment or God or meaning or whatever name you have given to the thing you are looking for has been happening in water, has been happening in the very thing that is being sought. The fish doesn't find water by swimming further. It finds water by stopping, by being still enough to notice what has always been there, by relaxing the frantic searching and simply being a fish in the ocean, which is what it was all along. This is the invitation. This is the direction being pointed, not toward something that needs to be attained, traveled to, achieved, earned, or produced, toward what is already here, the awareness that is already present, the ground that is already underneath everything. Let your breath slow a little more. Feel the weight of the body, the warmth of wherever you are lying or sitting, the slight texture of the air in the room, the sounds, whatever they are, all of it arising in awareness, all of it simply here. This is it, this moment exactly as it is, not a stepping stone to a better moment, not an inadequate precursor to the moment when you finally understand. This, the sounds and the breath and the body and the awareness, this is what is, and it is, in its way, extraordinary. The simple fact of it, the simple fact of there being experience at all, of the universe having arranged itself into something that is aware of itself, even briefly, even partially, even imperfectly. You are the universe being aware of itself. Right now, in this moment of quiet and rest and the soft drift towards sleep. Let us think about thought itself for a little while. This is something Watts was fascinated by, the self-reflexive nature of thought, the way the mind can turn on itself and think about thinking, the extraordinary recursive loop of consciousness observing consciousness. Most animals, as far as we can tell, do not do this. A dog experiences its environment. It has emotions. It makes decisions. It solves problems. But it probably does not lie awake at night thinking about the fact that it is lying awake. It does not generate narrative about itself. It does not have a continuous interior monologue that comments on its own existence. This self-reflective capacity is, in evolutionary terms, very recent. It is associated with the development of language, which is a tool of extraordinary power. Language allows the encoding of experience in symbolic form. It allows the transmission of experience from one person to another. It allows the construction of models of reality, of past and future, of self and other. It is the foundation of everything we call culture and civilization. But language also creates something that no pre-linguistic creature has to deal with. It creates the verbal self-model, the narrative self, the I that thinks about itself, judges itself, tells itself stories about itself, and in so doing, creates the very convincing, very persistent, ultimately somewhat misleading impression of being a solid, bounded, continuous thing that exists independently of the process of narrating it. The self is, in part, a story the mind tells about itself. This is not to say it is false. The story is real as a story. The narrative of you, your history, your personality, your relationships, your values and habits and ways of being in the world, all of this is real as narrative. It has consequences. It shapes behavior. It is not nothing. But a story is not the same as the territory it describes. The map is not the territory. The menu is not the meal. The word water does not quench thirst. And the narrative of the self is not the self in the deepest sense. The self in the deepest sense is the awareness that precedes and underlies and makes possible the narrative. The self in the deepest sense is what Watts sometimes called the real you. Not the psychological you, the collection of traits and memories and habits. Not the biological you, the body, but the awareness itself, the simple, open, present quality of conscious experience. And this self, the awareness self, rather than the narrative self, has a very different relationship to the world than the ego has. It does not need to defend itself, because it cannot be threatened by circumstances. It does not need to manage the future, because it is always and only in the present. It does not need to avoid unpleasant experiences, because it is the container in which all experiences, pleasant and unpleasant alike, arise and pass without adding or removing anything from the container. This container, this awareness, this ground, is what Watts was trying to point at, not describe. You cannot describe it, not really, because it is prior to the language in which any description would have to be given. But you can point at it. You can point at it the way you point at the sky, knowing that your finger is not the sky, and that the person who has never seen the sky cannot see it from your description. But if the person looks in the direction you are pointing, and if the sky happens to be clear, and the attention is receptive, and the day is right, they might just see it. Look, right now, in the direction I am pointing. The thoughts. Watch them, not by staring at them hard, by relaxing around them, by allowing them to be present without following them. As if you were sitting at the edge of a stream, watching the water go by, without stepping into the water. A thought arises, maybe about tomorrow, maybe about something someone said, maybe about these words and what they mean. Watch it, see it as a thought, not the reality it describes, just the thought, and then let it move on down the stream. Another thought arises, maybe about whether this is working, whether you are doing it right, whether you are going to fall asleep. Watch that thought too. There it is, just a thought, moving on. And in between the thoughts, in the gap, however brief, before the next thought arrives and after the last one has passed, what is there? Awareness, simply awareness, open, present, undisturbed. Not your awareness in the possessive sense, just awareness, the thing that all experience happens in, the background that makes it possible for there to be a foreground. You cannot hold that awareness by trying to hold it. Trying to hold it is itself just another thought, another event in the stream. But you can notice it. You can be it, which you always already are. You can relax into it, which is simply to stop straining toward something else. This is the practice of a lifetime. Not because it is difficult in the way that learning a language is difficult, or climbing a mountain is difficult, but because the habit of straining, the habit of reaching for the next moment, the habit of being anywhere other than here, is so deeply ingrained that it requires constant, gentle, patient returning. Not arriving, returning. Not achieving presence, simply noticing when you are absent and coming back. The Buddhist tradition has a beautiful way of talking about this. In mindfulness meditation, the instructions are simply to pay attention to the breath, and whenever the mind wanders, to notice that it has wandered and bring it gently back. That is the entire instruction. Notice and return. Notice and return. Over and over, without judgment, without frustration at the wandering, without special credit for the returning. Just the continuous, patient practice of noticing and returning. And what this practice does over time is not eliminate the wandering. The mind will wander. The mind wanders. That is what minds do. The practice does not stop the wandering. What it does is introduce a gap, a tiny but crucial gap between the arising of a thought and the total identification with that thought. A moment in which the thought is seen as a thought, rather than simply being the thought. And in that gap, everything changes. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually, over time, the relationship to thought becomes different, less compelled, less automatic. The thought arises and there is a choice, a space of choice, where before there was just the thought. The choice to follow it or not. The choice to act from it or not. The choice to believe it or not. This is freedom. Not the dramatic freedom of being beyond all conditioning, beyond all thought, beyond all the structures of the ordinary mind. That kind of freedom may exist, and the great masters seem to point toward it, but a more immediate, more accessible freedom, the freedom of the gap, the freedom of the moment of awareness before the automatic reaction, the freedom to be, not entirely, not exclusively, not helplessly, the thought. And this freedom is available right now, in this moment, in this quiet, in the soft drift toward sleep. Let us talk about sleep itself for a moment. Watts found sleep deeply interesting philosophically. He pointed out that every night, without exception, the thing you are most afraid of losing, the self, goes away. Every night you lose consciousness. You lose the narrative. You lose the sense of being a bounded, continuous, self-aware individual. And you do not find this terrifying. You find it restful. You seek it out. You create conditions for it. You feel deprived when it doesn't happen, and restored when it does. What does this tell us about the self? If the loss of self-consciousness is the most restorative experience available to human beings, if the nightly dissolution of the ego is not experienced as catastrophic, but as necessary and deeply pleasant, what does that suggest about the relationship between the self and well-being? It suggests, at minimum, that the self is not as essential to well-being as the ego likes to believe. That consciousness doesn't need the self to be okay. That awareness can function, and function beautifully, without the narrative. That what the body-mind system most needs in order to restore itself and function well is precisely the period in which the ego takes a break. The ego, useful as it is during the waking hours, is also costly. It requires resources. It consumes energy. It generates tension. It maintains vigilance. And when it is allowed to relax in sleep, the organism bounces back. The nervous system repairs itself. The mind consolidates and integrates. The body heals. This is perhaps the deepest and most practical argument for the value of the contemplative insight. Not that enlightenment will make you happy, though it might. Not that seeing through the illusion of the self will give you peace, though it will. But that loosening the grip of the ego, even slightly, even for brief periods, allows the organism to function more naturally, more efficiently, more healthily. Think about the moments in your own life when you have been happiest. Not the moments of achieved goals or received recognition or external success, though those can certainly bring pleasure. But the moments of deepest, most genuine, most unconditional happiness. The moments of simple joy. The moments of being completely here. Very likely, in those moments, you were not thinking about yourself. You were not monitoring your happiness and evaluating whether it was sufficient. You were not managing the experience for the sake of a future memory. You were simply in it. The self was temporarily transparent, not in the way of sleep, but in the way of complete absorption, complete presence. Children live there, young children, before the self-narrative is fully established, live in this quality of complete presence much of the time. This is why watching the child play is so moving and so restoring. They are fully here, fully in what they are doing. The present moment is completely sufficient. There is no gap between where they are and where they should be. And as we grow, as the self-narrative develops and strengthens, as the social self, with all its concerns and comparisons and insecurities, takes shape, this quality of presence is gradually crowded out. Not gone, never entirely gone, but less constant, less accessible, more dependent on particular conditions. The work of what we might loosely call spiritual practice is, in large part, the work of recovering this quality of presence. Not by going back to childhood, which is not possible and would not be desirable anyway, but by developing a relationship with the adult self that allows the presence to coexist with the developed capacity for thought and language and self-reflection. By integrating the wisdom of the contemplative insight with the full functioning of the adult mind. This is the project, and it is not something you accomplish and then are done with. It is an ongoing practice, a continuous cultivation, a daily and hourly returning to what is already here. Let us spend some time in the silence between thoughts. You are drifting now, perhaps, The mind is beginning to lose its grip on the linear sequence of these ideas. The thoughts are coming more slowly. The body is heavier. The breath is slow and deep and easy. This is the threshold state. This is the hypnagogic edge. This is where the ordinary waking mind begins to dissolve back into the deeper ground of awareness. Let it dissolve. Don't hold on. You don't need these ideas. You don't need to remember them. Whatever is true in them will be here when you wake up. The insight, if it is going to come, will come in its own time, in its own way. Right now, there is nothing to achieve and nowhere to be, and nothing to hold. The breath, in and out, in and out. Each exhale a letting go, each exhale a releasing of the day, the concerns, the plans, the worries, the whole apparatus of the self and its project. The universe is very large. It has been going on for a very long time, and it will continue going on for a very long time after tonight is over. All of it happening, all of it unfolding, all of it exactly as impermanent and exactly as real as it has always been. The stars burning through the night, the planet turning, the seasons moving through their slow cycle, the cells dividing and dying and dividing again, in the extraordinary biological machinery of your body. All of it continuing, all of it fine, all of it requiring absolutely nothing from you right now, except your participation in this moment of rest. The self that worries, the self that plans, the self that manages and monitors and evaluates, that self is getting quieter now, settling, the way water settles when you stop stirring it, the way the surface of a pond becomes still on a windless night, the surface going smooth, the reflections becoming clear. In that stillness, something can be seen, not something dramatic, not a vision or a revelation or an extraordinary experience, just the simple quality of awareness itself. The fact that there is experience, the fact that something is here, the fact that right now, in this moment, the universe is happening, and you are the universe happening. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is, in fact, the totality of what there is. Nothing is missing. Everything that is here is everything that is. And everything that is everything that is here. The breath is slowing. The thoughts are farther apart now. The spaces between them are longer. In those spaces, the awareness is clear and open and present and completely untroubled. Let the spaces grow. Let the thoughts drift by without following them. Let the breath be the anchor, the simple physical fact of the air coming in and going out, the body knowing what to do, the organism handling itself, the self resting in the awareness that doesn't need to do anything. You are made of the same material as the stars. The hydrogen in your body was present in the very first minutes after the Big Bang. The carbon and oxygen and nitrogen and iron were forged in the nuclear furnaces of stars that exploded billions of years ago and scattered their material into space. And from that scattered material, the sun was born, and the earth coalesced, and the ocean formed, and in the ocean the first chemistry of life began. You are not in the universe. You are the universe in a particular form, a form that breathes and thinks and feels, and now is growing quiet and still in the approach to sleep. The universe is resting in you tonight, or rather, you are the universe resting. The same thing, from two different angles. Let that rest be complete. Let it be the rest that the organism needs, the deep, restorative, fully releasing rest that comes when the ego stops managing and the awareness simply is. We have been talking for a long time, and we will continue for as long as is useful. But let me say something now that I want to be sure has been heard. You are okay. Not okay in the sense of everything being fixed, everything being resolved, everything being as you wish it were, but okay in the deeper sense. The sense that the awareness that is you has never been damaged by anything that has happened. The sense that the consciousness in which all your experiences arise, pleasant and unpleasant alike, is unchanged by those experiences. The sense that what you most fundamentally are is not the wounded or triumphant or struggling or succeeding or failing or anything else person that the story makes you. It is the awareness that contains all of those stories. And awareness, pure awareness, is not okay or not okay. It simply is. It is the condition of possibility for anything to be experienced as okay or not okay. And it is uninjured. It is undiminished. It is completely, utterly, fully present right now, in this moment, as it always is, as it always has been, as it always will be. Let that in. Let that land in the body as a physical sensation if it can. The sense that something at the very center of you, something that is you in the most essential way, is fine, is not in danger, is not injured, is not inadequate, is not less than what it should be. The story says otherwise, perhaps. The story has many things to say about what is wrong and what needs fixing and what has been failed and what is at risk. The story is very good at saying these things. It has been practicing for decades. But the awareness in which the story arises is not the story, and the awareness is fine. Let us go deeper into this quiet. The thoughts are very slow now. The body is very heavy. The room is very dark and very still. The breath is the most present thing, the gentle rhythm of it, the almost imperceptible movement of the chest, the slight warmth of the exhaled air. This is the most immediate thing, more immediate than any thought, more immediate than any memory or anticipation or worry or plan. The breath, the physical, actual, present breath, in this body, in this moment. Stay with it for a moment, not controlling it, just being aware of it. The inhale, the small pause at the top, the exhale, the small pause at the bottom, the whole cycle, slow and complete and sufficient. The mind that was generating all of those thoughts is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. It hasn't been defeated or transcended, but it has found its level, for now. It has settled into something more like the mind's natural resting state, which is not the frantic production of narrative, but the quiet ambient awareness of what is present. And what is present is this: the room, the dark, the warmth, the breath, the vague presence of the body, the awareness of all of this, the simple, extraordinary, unremarkable, unprecedented, ordinary fact of being here. Very few people notice this. Most people either fall asleep at this point or start thinking about something. The quality of the threshold, the quality of being right here at the edge between waking and sleeping, is usually passed through rather than inhabited. But you can inhabit it. You can be here, right at the edge, for as long as it lasts. And in being here, at the edge, something becomes available that is not usually available. A kind of clarity that is different from the clarity of sharp, focused thought. A spacious, gentle, wide-angle clarity. The clarity of a mind that has stopped insisting and is simply receiving. In this clarity, the insights that were being presented earlier might feel different, not as ideas to be evaluated and filed, as something more directly seen, less like being told something and more like noticing something that was there all along. The self and the world are not as separate as they feel. The present moment is the only place anything has ever happened. The awareness that is here now is the same awareness that has always been here. The thoughts are not who you are. They are something you are doing, or something that is happening in you. But they are not the ground. They are the weather. The ground is the awareness. And the awareness is fine. The awareness has always been fine. Even during the worst moments, even during the moments that were hardest and most painful and most lost, the awareness that was present in those moments was not injured. The experiences were painful. The circumstances were difficult. But the awareness itself, the pure quality of consciousness in which those experiences arose, that was not harmed. This is a strange and important distinction. The experiences were real. The pain was real. The difficulty was real. This is not being denied. But the awareness in which the experiences arose was not the experiences. It was the space in which they occurred. And the space is uninjured. You can test this right now. Think of something painful, something from your past. Let it be present in the mind for a moment, and then notice. The awareness in which this thought is arising right now, in this moment, is that thought of painful things aware of itself as painful? Is the awareness injured by the painful content it is holding? If you look carefully, you will find that it is not. The thought has content that feels painful. The memory has associated feelings that are unpleasant. But the awareness itself, the quality of simply being here and being conscious, that is undisturbed. It contains the thought the way the sky contains a cloud. The sky is not hurt by the cloud. This is the insight that heals, not by removing the difficult experiences, not by fixing what has been broken, not by correcting what has gone wrong, but by recognizing that the ground on which you stand, the awareness in which all of this is occurring, was never broken, was never wrong, was never insufficient. The story of the self says, I am damaged. I am not enough. Something needs to be fixed or healed or achieved before I am okay. The ego says, I am insufficient. But the awareness that is here right now, the awareness that is you in the deepest sense, the awareness that was here before the first word and will be here after the last thought, that awareness has never been insufficient, has never been damaged, has never needed to be fixed. It simply is, completely, fully, right now. Let your body receive that. Let whatever tension is held in the muscles of the chest or the belly or the shoulders be seen as the body's expression of the ego's insistence on the insufficiency of now. And then let it soften, not by forcing it, not by deciding to relax, by recognizing that the thing the tension was protecting against, the threat that the tension was responding to, is not present in this moment. The awareness is here. It is fine. It does not need protecting. The breath is very slow now. The thoughts are rare and gentle. The awareness is open and spacious. You are very close to sleep. Let us just stay here for a while, in this quiet, in this ease, in this awareness that needs nothing, requires nothing, refuses nothing. The universe is doing what it does, all of it, all at once. The galaxies are moving, the stars are burning, the planet is turning. Somewhere, a child is being born. Somewhere, someone is looking at the night sky and feeling what you sometimes feel when you look at the night sky. Somewhere, something extraordinary is happening for the first time. And here, in this particular location, this particular body is drifting toward sleep. This particular awareness, which is the same awareness that is at the center of all of those other experiences, is relaxing into the rest it needs. The self is becoming quiet. The narrative is slowing to a stop. The thoughts are fewer and further apart. The awareness remains simple, open, present. This is what you are. This is what has always been here. This is the thing you have been looking for, in all of the ways you have ever looked for anything. The peace, the okayness, the sufficiency of now. The simple, undeniable, always already present fact of being here. You are here. That is enough. That has always been enough. Let yourself rest now, completely and without reservation. The universe will continue. It knows what it is doing. It has been doing it for a very long time. You can let go now. And as you let go, as the mind slips down from the threshold into the deeper waters of sleep, let the last thing that is here before the thinking stops be this. The awareness that is you has never been separate from the awareness that is everything. The self that you have been protecting and managing and worrying about and trying to improve is not what you actually are. What you actually are is the awareness in which all of that is happening. The ground, the sky, the ocean, of which the wave is only the most recent expression. And that ground, that sky, that ocean, is not going anywhere. It is not in danger. It cannot be lost. It cannot be damaged. It cannot be insufficient. It is what is here when everything else falls away, when the thoughts fall away, when the narrative falls away, when the ego's project falls away into sleep. What is here is awareness, pure, open, present, undamaged, sufficient, completely okay awareness. That is what you are. Sleep now. Dream, if you will, or simply rest in the deep, dreamless quiet where the self dissolves and what remains is the ground from which everything arises. The night is long. The universe is patient. The awareness will be here when you wake. Good night. If you are still here, still gently awake at the edge of things, that is perfectly fine. There is more space here, more quiet, more of this gentle drifting. Let us continue to rest together in these ideas, not to work through them, not to arrive anywhere, simply to rest in them, the way you might rest in warm water. Not swimming, not going anywhere, simply resting in the medium of these thoughts as they gradually grow quieter and further apart. The ego, we were talking about the ego, the remarkable, useful, costly, somewhat confused ego. This part of the mind that has taken on a project that is larger than any project can ever be. The project of making things okay. The project of securing the self. The project of ensuring that the future will be acceptable. The project that can never end because the future never stops arriving with new content that requires new management. And the curious thing about this project, the thing that Watts found endlessly fascinating, is that it is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. Not a mistake you made, not a character flaw, not something that can be blamed on your particular history or your particular circumstances. A structural feature of the way human consciousness develops that is so universal it might as well be part of the species description. The misunderstanding is this: the belief that you are separate. Not separate in the obvious superficial sense, that your body has a boundary and other bodies are over there, and you and they are different things. That is true and useful and fine. The misunderstanding is deeper than that. It is the belief that the awareness that is you is a private possession of a particular body. That consciousness is a product of this particular brain. That experience is happening to a particular isolated self that is fundamentally alone in a universe that does not share its nature. This belief at the experiential level feels completely self-evident. Of course I am here and you are there. Of course my thoughts are private and my experience is mine alone. Of course there is a clear line between self and world. And yet every mystic tradition that has ever explored the nature of consciousness with any rigor has arrived at the same conclusion. the conclusion that the apparent separateness of individual consciousness is not the final truth of the matter, that consciousness, awareness, the simple, open quality of experience, is not divisible in the way that physical objects are divisible, that what feels like my awareness and what feels like your awareness are two apertures into the same light. This does not need to be believed. It is a pointer, a direction, something to look in the direction of, not a conclusion to be adopted. The value of these ideas is not in accepting them as true, but in being moved by them to look more carefully at your own experience, to actually investigate the nature of the self that is hearing these words, to actually look for the looker and see what is found. And what is found, when the looking is patient and honest and genuinely curious, is precisely what Watts and the Zen masters and the Upanishadic seers and the Christian mystics have all pointed toward. Not a separate self at the center of experience, but awareness, open, boundless, present awareness, in which the thoughts and feelings and sensations of what we call the self are arising and passing, but which is itself neither arising nor passing. The sky, always there, behind everything. The clouds come and go. The sky remains. You are the sky, not the clouds. The clouds are real. They matter. They affect things. Rain comes from clouds. But you are not the clouds. You are the sky in which they arise. And the sky right now is very quiet. The clouds of thought are growing sparse. The blue, clear, open awareness is becoming more visible, not because you did anything to clear the sky, simply because the clouds, on their own schedule, are fewer and further apart. This is what sleep approaching feels like, from the inside. The sky of awareness becoming visible through the thinning clouds of thought. Not a different state, the same state, with less interference. The awareness that is always here, becoming more apparent as the thoughts that usually obscure it grow quieter. Rest in the sky. Let the awareness be what it is. Let the breath continue on its own. Let the body be heavy and warm and completely surrendered to whatever is holding it. The universe is out there, doing what it does. Billions of galaxies, each one hundreds of billions of stars, each one surrounded by planets, some of those planets possibly alive, possibly conscious, possibly having their own version of this experience right now. Consciousness exploring itself in an unimaginable variety of forms, across unimaginable distances, over unimaginable spans of time. And here, in this small, specific, precious, temporary location, this awareness, this breath, this quiet, this edge of sleep. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. The awareness that can be described is not the awareness itself. The self that can be found in a story is not the self that is prior to all stories. What you are is prior to all descriptions of what you are. You are here before the first word. You will be here after the last thought. Right now, in the quiet, with the thoughts growing slow and the breath growing deep, you are closer to that prior to words reality than you are most of the time. Stay here, right here, at the edge, in the quiet, in the almost sleep. The awareness is here. You are here. They are the same thing. Let the words become less important now. Let them become more like sound than meaning, more like the quality of a voice in the dark than like information being delivered. Let the meaning blur at the edges and the quality of the presence remain. Presence. That is all. Just presence. The awareness that is here, the breath that is moving, the body that is still, the night that is dark and quiet and patient. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is the thing itself, right here, right now. The thoughts, if they come, are gentle now, not insistent, not demanding, just passing, just weather in the sky. And the sky is clear. The sky is always clear, underneath and behind and around and through the weather. You are the sky. Let the weather pass. Let the breath be slow. Let the night be deep. Awareness is here. It will be here. It has always been here. Whatever you dream, whatever you wake to, whatever the morning holds, the awareness will be here. The ground will be there. The sky will be there. You are that. You have always been that. You will always be that. Sleep now. Rest now. Let the narrative dissolve into the quiet from which it arose. Let the self rest in the awareness that contains it. Let the wave return to the ocean. The ocean is very still tonight. The surface is smooth and dark and reflects the stars. And underneath the surface, the great depth, the patient, permanent, undisturbed depth that has been here long before anything was on the surface, that will be here long after the last wave has passed. That is what you are, not the wave, the ocean, temporarily waving, temporarily having this particular form of experience. But in your deepest nature, in the awareness that underlies all of this, the ocean, deep, still, vast. Good night. The universe is here. The awareness is here. You are here. And everything, in the most fundamental sense that the word can possibly mean, is fine. Sleep deeply. Rest completely. The ground is steady. The sky is clear. The awareness will be here when you wake. Good night.